why do we have to disaggregate the problems into the issues? If we deal with the very complicated and sophisticated problems, it's very difficult for us where to start and what's the key causes or root causes. But once we disaggregate the issues into a lot of small issues, and then it's very easy for us to identify what's the critical issues we have to tackle. So disaggregating is very important step in problem solving. So once we disaggregated big sophisticated problems into small pieces, and we may move on to the step number 3, that is prioritizing the issues. When we disaggregate the issues into small pieces, there are lots of small issues we have to deal with. But given very limited time period or limited resources, we cannot tackle all the issues we disaggregated. So inevitably, we have to prioritize the list of the issues and for analysis to analyze first. Okay. So in this third step, we have to think speed. What is the most important issue in tackling the problem? Okay. So in prioritizing the issues, there are two things we have to consider. One is, what are the important issues we have to tackle? And then the second point is that how much time do we have in tackling such issues? So if the small issue is really important and it doesn't take a long time for analysis, and that's absolutely something we have to tackle. So that's top priority issues we want to analyze. But in some cases, there are the issues that are very important, but it takes a lot of time for analysis. And then we have to think about the speed. Because, for example, only 3 months are given for us to develop our business strategy. But one issue is really critical, but it may take 3 years to analyze and then to analyze and to prove the early hypothesis. And you should be very cautious in tackling such issues because it takes too long time. It's way beyond our project timeline. There's another issue that is not that important, but it takes a long time. So in that case, we will simply ignore analyzing such issues. And in other cases, there are the issues that's quite important, but it doesn't take a long time, and quickly we will find the right answers. In that case, absolutely, we have to spend some time to get an answer on that issue. So that's something we have to do in the third step, prioritizing the issues. Why do we need this step? Because in the second step, we disaggregated big issues into small pieces, but there are lots of issues to cover, and inevitably we have to prioritize which issue we will tackle based on the first importance of the issues in problem solving, and second, the timeline or the speed of analyzing such issues. Once the prioritizing the issues is done, we will move on to the step number 4, that is developing work plans. I recommend you to develop the realistic and detailed work plans before conducting the analysis. Why do we develop work plans? In this stage, we have to think about efficiency of spending our time. What is the best way to efficiently utilize the time of the team? As I said, as a team, we don't have a lot of time and we don't have a lot of resources to prove what's true or what's false. So given the limited time and resources, we have to efficiently utilize our time of the team. So developing work plans is really critical to minimize our, to maximize the efficiency of our time as a team. Once work plans are developed, and then we move on to the step number 5, that is conducting the analysis. In the step number 5, we have to think about the evidence. What is the hypothesis we would like to prove, and what could be the proper evidences to prove that the hypothesis is true or not? And then once we conduct a lot of analysis, we will move on to the next step, step number 6, that is aggregating the outputs. After we conduct the analysis, I assume there are a lot of factual evidences we collected. Now, at this stage, we have lots of evidences to make a conclusion, but it's very difficult because there are too many information, facts, and evidences, it's very difficult to draw powerful conclusions. And in this stage of the stage number 6, that's why we think, so what? What is the most important implication of the data we collected? Simply listing all the data is not very helpful to build a business strategy. So implication, so what, is more important than just a bunch of the data. Okay? This is related to the one of the element of the strategic thinking. Okay, what is the element related to this step number 6, aggregating the outputs? That's conceptual thinking. When I say the conceptual thinking, that's aggregating a lot of the data and draw the implications from such data to make powerful solutions. That's element number 3, right, of the strategic thinking. So as a conceptual thinker, aggregating the outputs is related to this problem-solving stage. And once we aggregate the outputs and draw the storyline of the final conclusion, and we are developing presentation materials to report. In the final stage of the problem-solving is the stage we have to think potential solutions. What do we want to implement? Okay, So that's the final answer to our questions, to our problems. And also in this stage, we have to think about next iteration. As I said, this 7-step process cannot be done once. Once we have conducted this process, and in the final stage, we will think about what's the next, and if there is something we have to tackle, we will iterate these 7 problem-solving steps again and again. So in the final stage of developing presentation materials, there are two things we have to think about. One is, what's the potential solution? And the other is, what is the most important next steps? And as I said, that the communication should be done in all the 7 steps. And in the communication, we have to think about buy-in. How do we make consensus within the team and also outside the team with the stakeholders? How do we make consensus of our early hypothesis or our key findings or potential solutions within or outside the teams? So this is the overview of the 7 problem-solving steps. Okay, let me summarize some of the key lessons I would like to emphasize on this slide. First thing, okay, there are 7 steps in problem solving, starting from defining the problem, disaggregating the issues, prioritizing the issues, developing work plans, conducting the analysis, aggregating the outputs, developing presentation materials. And lesson number 2, the first step, defining the problem, is the most important step in solving the problems. Lesson number 3, this is not one final process. This should be reiterated to solve the problems. And lesson number 4 might be that this process is related to the 4 key elements of the strategic thinking. Okay. Now, let me move on to talk a little more specifically about defining the problem steps. So, for the rest of today's lecture, I will focus more on defining the problem stage. And then in my next class, I will talk more about disaggregating the issues. Let me move on to talk a little bit more about defining the problem stage. Okay, if you look this slide, let me explain a little bit about this cartoon. One of the servants of the king came to visit the painter's house, and the servant is saying to the painter that the Andre is the name of the painter, and the servant is telling the Andre, the painter, that the king wants to know how you are coming with Saint George and the Dragon. Saint George and the Dragon is a legend in the legend of the West, and Saint George is very famous knight, and he always gets some help with the dragon and from the legend. Okay, and the king wants to have a picture of the paintings about the Saint George and Dragon. So he asked the painter named Andre to draw a painting about Saint George and the Dragon. And the servant came to the painter to check whether the painting is doing very well and when the painting is completed. But if you look at the picture of the painting, the Andre is not painting Saint George and the Dragon. Can you see the dragon on the paintings? No. There's someone putting his right egg inside the wagon, right? So the person on the painting is maybe the knight named Saint George, but there's no dragon on the painting. So the key message is that the painter Andre is not drawing the picture of Saint George and the Dragon. Instead, he is painting Saint George and the wagon. The dragon and wagons are a totally different thing, right? But the painter is drawing about the wagon, not the dragon. I don't know who's the mistake, but there is a mistake. So it's like Andre is not defining the problems properly. The client is the king. The client asked Andre to draw a painting about the Saint George and the Dragon. But Andre is making a painting about the Saint George and the wagon. So that's why I emphasized that defining the problem in early stage is very critical and important. Even though Andre has done his best to draw the best painting as much as possible, but it's useless because his painting is not about the Saint George and the Dragon. Okay? So the implications of this cartoon, to understand exactly what the problem is, that's the first important thing to do in problem solving. Okay? So whenever you try to solve the problem or so develop the business strategy, you have to understand the problem first, the context of the business strategy building, the background. That's something you have to understand. Even though you are so eager to tackle the problems as early as possible, but take more time in understanding the context of the problems, the background of the problems, and spend enough time in defining the problems properly. By doing that, you can effectively and efficiently utilize your time to draw the powerful business strategy or solution to the problems. Okay.